When you live alone, you grow used to the stillness, the predictable rhythm of your space. That's why last night shook me. I'd just wrapped up another long writing session, the kind where your eyes burn, and you can't. Remember the last time you blinked? I hit save, closed my laptop, and stumbled to bed. The moment my head hit the pillow, I heard it. Click, click, click. It was soft at first, almost faint enough to dismiss, but it grew louder, more deliberate, more insistent. I sat up, every hair on my body standing on end. My computer, I thought. Someone's using my computer. I crept to the living room, every step louder than the last in suffocating silence. The screen was dark, the keyboard untouched, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. This morning, I found my answer. My laptop was on. The cursor blinked beneath a chilling message. Don't turn away. I stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. The words felt alive, mocking me. My first instinct was to shut the laptop, to pretend I hadn't seen them, but my fingers hovered over the lid. What if there was more? What if it was a prank or a virus? Don't be stupid, I muttered, forcing myself to look around the room. Nothing seemed out of place. The same cluttered desk, the same worn-out chair, the same oppressive stillness. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart thudding in my chest. The message didn't change. It didn't delete itself. It just sat there, waiting. I couldn't resist. I opened my file history, desperate for some explanation. Maybe I'd left a document open, or maybe I'd been sleepwalking. But the last file opened was my work draft, saved hours before. My hands trembled as I checked the keyboard. It felt cold, untouched. That's when I noticed something else. My email was open. I didn't remember logging in, but there it was, my inbox glaring at me with an unread message. The subject line simply read, "Look. Closer, closer." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to slam the laptop shut and walk away, but the words pulled me in. Like a magnet, I clicked the email. It was empty. No sender, no body, nothing. Just an attachment. Against my better judgment, I opened it. The file was a video, a shaky recording of my living room. The camera focused on my desk, on me. I was there, sitting at my computer, typing furiously. The timestamp was from last night, just minutes after I'd gone to bed. I closed the laptop with a snap, my chest tightening as I stumbled backward. This wasn't possible. I hadn't been there. I hadn't touched the computer. But the video said otherwise. Click, click, click. The sound returned, louder than before, but this time it wasn't coming from the laptop. It was coming from behind me. I froze, the hairs on my neck standing up as the sound grew sharper, more deliberate. Click, click, click. Each keystroke echoed through the silence, louder than it should have been. My body felt like lead, but somehow I forced myself to turn around. The desk was empty. My chair sat where I'd left it, the cushions worn and sagging. The sound stopped abruptly, leaving the air heavy with tension. My pulse thudded in my ears as I scanned the room, my eyes darting to the dark corners where the light from the screen didn't reach. Hello? My voice was barely a whisper, trembling as if I didn't want a response. The silence deepened, oppressive and alive, pressing down on me like a weight. I backed toward the desk, gripping the edge as though it could anchor me. I didn't trust myself to move farther. My gaze returned to the laptop, its screen glowing faintly, mocking me again, and then started typing on its own. "Why do you turn away?" I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. The words kept coming, letter by letter, deliberate and slow. "You were supposed to stay." "Stay," I stammered, the word catching in my throat. I wasn't even sure why I responded, but the typing paused as if waiting for me. Then it resumed. "Stay with me." "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice cracking. I didn't expect an answer, but the screen responded instantly. "You'll see." Before I could react, the screen flickered and went black. The soft blue glow that had lit the room vanished, plunging me into darkness. And that's when I saw it, A figure barely more than a shadow, standing just beyond the desk. Its outline shimmered faintly, indistinct, but its presence was undeniable. It tilted its head, as though studying me, and then stepped closer. I screamed, stumbling back and tripping over the coffee table. My head hit the edge hard enough to blur my vision, but through the pain, I heard it. Click, click, click. Me now, relentless and inescapable. When I came to, the room was quiet again, bathed in the soft gray of early morning. My laptop sat, closed on the desk, the screen dark and still. For a moment, I thought it had all been a dream, a vivid, terrifying nightmare, but then I saw the email still open on the screen. Another message had appeared, short and chilling. It's not over. I scrambled to my feet, my head pounding. The apartment felt wrong, as though it had been rearranged in some imperceptible way. Desperate for answers, I called my friend Ethan. He was the only person I could trust, the only one who wouldn't think I'd lost my mind. Ethan arrived later that evening, his presence a small comfort in the suffocating atmosphere. I explained everything as he listened with a skeptical frown, his arms crossed tightly.
So what?
You think your laptop is haunted? He asked, his tone edging on disbelief. I don't know, I snapped. Just stay the night. You'll see. Reluctantly, Ethan agreed. We set up a camera on the desk, pointing directly at the laptop, and another in the living room to capture the whole space. If anything happened, we'd have proof. Or so we thought. The night passed slowly. Ethan dozed off on the couch while I sat curled up in the armchair, watching the laptop like a hawk. For hours, nothing happened. No typing, no flickering, no shadows creeping in the corners. I started to think I'd imagined it all. But then, around 3:00 a.m., the clicking returned. Soft at first, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. My eyes darted to the laptop, which had powered on by itself. The typing began. Faster this time, words spilling across the screen in a frantic blur. Ethan jolted awake, his eyes wide with confusion. Do you see it? I whispered, my voice shaking. He nodded, his face pale. Yeah, what the hell is that? We both turned to the camera, but the screen was blank. No feed, no recording, just static. Ethan's jaw tightened as he grabbed his phone, aiming it at the laptop, but the second he hit record, the typing stopped, the screen went blank again, and the oppressive silence returned. I thought it was over until Ethan's phone buzzed in his hand. He glanced at the screen and froze,
His eyes widening. It's from you, he whispered, holding the phone out to me.
The message on his screen sent chills down my spine. Don't interfere. The words were signed with my name. I grabbed the phone from Ethan's hand, my own trembling so hard I almost dropped it. My name stared back at me in the message, bold and unmistakable. I didn't send this, I whispered, but even to my ears it sounded weak, like a lie told to convince myself. I believe you, Ethan said, though his voice betrayed his fear. His usual confidence had drained away, leaving him as unsettled as I was. But if it's not you, then who, or what, is doing this? Before I could answer, the typing started again. This time, it was deafening, like a jackhammer. Tearing through the air, both of us turned to the laptop, which had powered itself back on. Words filled the screen faster than I could process. I warned you. You didn't listen. You made me wait. The words blurred together until a final sentence froze us both in place. Now, it's his turn. The cursor blinked as the message faded, leaving the screen black once more. The silence that followed was suffocating. Ethan stared at me, his face ashen, then turned toward the front door. We should leave, he said quickly, grabbing his coat. Before we could take a step, the door slammed shut on its own, the sound reverberating like a gunshot. The locks clicked into place one by one, as if an unseen hand had turned them. Open it, Ethan shouted, yanking at the knob with all his strength. The door didn't budge. I stood, frozen, my mind racing. The room seemed smaller, darker, the walls pressing in on us. And then the typing started again, only this time it wasn't from the laptop. It was coming from the walls. Click, click, click. I spun around, trying to pinpoint the source, but it seemed to come from everywhere at once. Abandoned the door and joined me, his face twisted in panic. "What the hell is going on?" he yelled. The typing grew louder, almost mocking us until it suddenly stopped. A voice, low, guttural, and impossibly close, whispered, "You shouldn't have come." The lights flickered, and for a split second, I saw it. Directly behind Ethan, its head tilted toward me, and though it had no face, I could feel it smiling. "Ethan, move!" I screamed, but before he could react, the figure lunged. Ethan was yanked backward with such force that he hit the wall, his head snapping against the plaster. He slumped to the ground unconscious, or worse. No, I rushed to him, but the shadow loomed over us both. It reached for me, its touch icy and paralyzing. My body refused to move as its fingers closed around my wrist, pulling me closer to the laptop. The screen flared to life, casting an eerie glow on the shadow's outline. "Finish what you started." The words burned into my brain as the figure forced my hands to the keyboard. My fingers moved. Against my will, typing furiously, though I couldn't see the words. Hours later, I woke up alone. Ethan was gone, the room eerily quiet. My laptop sat on the desk, closed as though nothing had happened, but when I opened it, my heart dropped. A document was open, a story I didn't remember writing. It detailed everything that had happened. The night before, every word, every scream, every moment of terror, and then it continued. It described Ethan's disappearance, the figure dragging him into the shadows, and me sitting here, reading it all. The final line chilled me to my core. It's not over. It's never over. I slammed the laptop shut and ran for the door. This time, it opened easily, the cold morning air hitting my face like a slap. I stumbled into the hallway, unsure of where to go or what to do, but as I reached for my phone to call for help, I saw the notification. One new email, from me. The subject line read, "Don't look away." And behind me, I heard it again, click, click, click. Have you ever experienced something you couldn't explain? Tell us your story. I woke up to a strange, suffocating silence. Not the kind of silence where you just wake up before your alarm. This was heavy, like the world had stopped breathing. The glow of my bedside clock read 3:47 a.m., but it felt like I'd been asleep for only minutes. Something wasn't right. As my eyes adjusted to the dark, I scanned my room. Everything was where it should be. The desk, the chair piled with clothes, the faint outline of my door. But then my gaze stopped, stuck on the corner of the room. There was something there, a shape, a shadow. At first, I thought it was my coat hanging weirdly on the back of the chair, but then I noticed it wasn't still, it was watching me. When I leaned forward to look closer, my chest tightened in horror. It wasn't a shadow, it was a person. And it wasn't just any person, it was me. I blinked, hoping my eyes were still fogged with sleep, that this was some trick of the dark, but no matter how many times I tried, it didn't change. That thing in the corner didn't disappear. It stayed there. I stayed there, watching me. The longer I stared, the more certain I became. It wasn't just something that looked like me. It was me. Same hair, same face, same slightly slouched posture I saw every time I passed a mirror. Except its expression was wrong, blank, like someone had pressed pause on a video of me, freezing my face mid-thought. I wanted to move, to shout, to do anything, but my body wouldn't cooperate. I felt pinned in place, like the weight of that thing's gaze was pressing me into the mattress. My breath came out shallow, ragged. Was this a dream, a nightmare? The thought almost calmed me, until it moved. It was slow, so subtle I might not have noticed if I hadn't been staring so intently. A slight tilt of its head, just enough for its eyes to catch the faint glow of the moonlight through my window. And that's when I realized something even worse. It wasn't just watching me. It was aware. Something inside me snapped, some primal instinct taking over. I shot out of bed, my legs shaky, my voice coming out in a panicked stammer. Who are you? My voice sounded too loud. In the silence, echoing back at me like I'd just yelled into a canyon. The figure didn't answer. It didn't need to. Instead, it took a single step backward into the shadows. And as it moved, its edges seemed to blur and melt into the darkness. By the time I managed to stumble toward the corner, flipping on the overhead light, it was gone. Gone, as if it had never been there at all. I stood there for a long time, the light flooding my room, making everything feel almost normal. Almost. But even as I looked around, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it, I couldn't shake. The feeling that something had changed. The air was still heavy, still wrong, and the corner where it had stood, it felt colder, as if it had left part of itself behind. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw myself standing. There again, staring, unblinking, waiting. The morning light didn't do much to calm my nerves. I went through the motions of my day like a robot replaying what I'd seen over and over. I told myself it was just exhaustion, a sleep, deprived hallucination, but no amount of coffee or logic could shake the gnawing dread that followed me. Like a shadow. It didn't help that the day felt off, subtly, maddeningly wrong. I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror and froze. For a split second, it looked like it wasn't moving in sync with me. My head turned, but my reflection lagged, its eyes locked on mine as though it was studying me. When I blinked, it was back to normal, leaving me staring at my own pale, exhausted face. Get a grip, I muttered, splashing cold water on my face, but the chill that ran down my spine had nothing to do with the water. Things got worse when I left my apartment. I passed a cafe on my way to class and heard someone call my name. I turned instinctively, but the street behind me was empty. As I kept walking, my phone buzzed. A text from a friend asking why I hadn't said hi to him at the cafe. I wasn't there, I texted back. His reply came almost instantly. What are you talking about? I saw you. You were sitting near the window, staring out at nothing. The day spiraled from there. People said they saw me in places I hadn't been. Once I caught sight of myself, or someone who looked like me, turning a corner just ahead, but when I ran to catch up, there was no one there. When I got home that evening, I felt like I was being watched. The corner where the figure had stood the night before seemed darker than the rest of the room, even with the lights on. I couldn't shake the feeling that it hadn't truly left. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The oppressive air, the heavy silence, it was back, stronger than before. I sat on my bed, gripping my phone like it was some kind of lifeline, the faint glow of the screen doing little to push back the shadows. And then I saw it. I didn't notice it at first because it wasn't in the corner this time. It was standing closer, near the foot of my bed, just far enough into the shadows that I couldn't make out its features. But I knew. It was me. I swallowed hard, my voice barely a whisper. What do you want? For the first time, it spoke. Its voice was mine but distorted, like someone had layered static over the words. You left me. I shook my head, trying to make sense of the words.
What? What are you talking about?
You forgot, it hissed, stepping closer. The dim light caught its face, and my stomach churned. Its features were mine, but twisted. The blank expression was gone, replaced by something cruel, almost mocking. You left me behind in the dark, and now I'm taking back what's mine. My head throbbed with a sudden piercing memory, being a kid playing hide, and seek in a basement. I was so sure no one would find me that I hid behind a pile of boxes and waited. The hours stretched on until the light above me clicked off, plunging me into darkness. I remembered the panic, the screaming, and then nothing. I didn't mean to leave you, I whispered, barely able to get the words out. It stepped closer still, until it was right in front of me. I could feel its breath, my breath, cold and sharp against my skin. But you did, and now you're mine. Its hand shot out, grabbing my wrist, and I felt a jolt of icy pain. The room spun, the shadows stretching and twisting around me, and I realized with dawning horror that it wasn't just taking my place, it was taking me. I couldn't scream. The cold, spreading from its grip, wrapped around my chest, constricting my lungs, choking any sound I might have made. My wrist burned where it touched me, but instead of heat, it was the kind of cold that bites deep down to the bone. I tried to pull away, but its strength was overwhelming. It didn't just hold me, it anchored me. "I don't belong there anymore," it whispered, leaning in close. Its face was so near to mine that I could see every familiar detail twisted into something wrong.
"But you do. You left me there?"
"Forgotten, and now you'll take my place." The shadows around us thickened, the corners of the room bleeding into darkness. The air grew impossibly cold, and my legs buckled as it pulled me down. I felt the floor beneath me solid and familiar, but it was slipping away. The dim light of my lamp flickered, its warm glow swallowed inch by the encroaching black. "No!" I shouted, finally finding my voice. I thrashed, clawing at its arm, but it didn't flinch. It just tilted its head, that mocking smirk spreading wider. "You can't fight me. I am you," it said, its words dripping with finality, and then it yanked me. Hard. I fell. I don't know how far I fell, but the sensation was endless. It was as though I were tumbling through cold, endless space, my body weightless and my mind reeling. My screams echoed around me, muted and distant, like they didn't belong to me anymore. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the falling stopped. I hit the ground, not the soft carpet of my room, but cold, hard stone. My hands slapped against the surface, and I scrambled to my feet, gasping for air. The darkness was suffocating, pressing against me from every angle. "Hello," I called, my voice trembling. It echoed back, thin and distorted. Nothing answered, not at first. But then, a whisper. "You're back." The voice wasn't mine. It was layered, inhuman, like a chorus of overlapping murmurs. The sound came from everywhere at once, bouncing off the unseen walls of wherever I was. My chest tightened, panic clawing at me. "Who's there?" I demanded, turning in frantic circles. The shadows shifted, rippling like water, and something stepped forward. It was me again, or rather another version of me, but this one was worse. Its eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, empty and devoid of anything human. Its mouth twisted into a jagged grin that stretched too wide, as though its face was cracking under the weight of it. "You didn't think it would be that easy, did you?" It taunted, circling me like a predator. "You think you can just leave and forget what you left behind?" "I don't even know what you are," I shouted, backing away. My heart thundered in my chest, and my breath came in short, ragged gasps. "I don't know what's happening." It stopped, tilting its head, almost as if pitying me. "You don't remember," it said, its grin fading into something far more menacing. "But you will." Suddenly, the darkness around me began to flicker, images flashing like snapshots on a broken film reel. A basement, a little boy, me, huddled in the corner, sobbing. The stairs slammed shut, and the light blinked out. I felt the memory like it was happening all over again. The cold, the fear, the overwhelming sense of being trapped. "I didn't mean to leave you," I whispered, the words spilling out of me as the pieces of my childhood memory clicked into place. I didn't know you were still here." The figure stepped closer, its expression twisting with fury. "But you did leave. You moved on. You forgot." Its voice grew louder, angrier, and I waited. For years I waited in the dark, in the cold, alone. "I'm sorry," I choked out. Tears blurred my vision as the weight of it all crashed down on me. I had abandoned a part of myself, the part that had been trapped in that basement, frozen in fear, left behind as I grew up and pushed the memory deep into the recesses of my mind. "Sorry isn't enough," it spat, its voice trembling with rage. "You took the light, everything, and now it's your turn." The shadows surged forward, swallowing me whole. I tried to fight, but there was nothing to grab, nothing to push against. My arms flailed uselessly as the darkness dragged me deeper, the cold seeping into my bones. I screamed, but the sound was muffled, absorbed by the void. When I opened my eyes, I was back in my room, or at least I thought I was. The details were all wrong. The air was colder, the colors muted, as though I were seeing everything through a thing. Veil of smoke. I looked around, my heart pounding. My desk, my bed, my chair, they were all there, but distorted somehow, stretched, warped. And then I saw it, myself sitting on the bed. But it wasn't me, not anymore. The thing that had pulled me down, that had taken my place, it looked at me and smiled. "Don't worry," it said, my voice sounding far too smooth, far too casual. "I'll take good care of your life." I rushed forward, shouting, but my legs wouldn't move. I was stuck, frozen in the corner of the room, unable to do anything but watch. My chest heaved as I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I was trapped. The doppelganger, the new me, stood up, stretching as if trying on my skin. "Comfortable," it said, smirking. Then it walked toward the door, pausing only once to glance back at me. "You'll get used to it," it said, its grin widening. I did. The door shut behind it with a soft click, and I was left alone, in the dark, forever. What if the darkest part of yourself never lets go? Share this story if you've ever felt the shadows watching you. It wasn't unusual for me to wake up in the middle of the night. Stress, insomnia, and the occasional sound from outside often kept me tossing and turning, but that night was different. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears. And then I heard it. "Mark, Mark." The voice was calm, almost soothing, but it sent a shiver down my spine. I hadn't heard that voice in 5 years, my father's voice. I lay still, my mind racing to rationalize it. Maybe I'd imagined it, or maybe I was dreaming. But the room felt too real, the darkness too heavy. "Mark," it called again, firmer this time. "Come here, I need to talk to you." I sat up, my throat dry, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. Memories of my dad came flooding back, his steady voice, his piercing gaze, the way he always called me by name when he wanted my full attention. But none of those memories explained why I was hearing him now. Against my better judgment, I slid out of bed and tiptoed toward the living room, my breath
Shallow, my body cold. The voice didn't come again, but I didn't need it to. I could feel his
presence waiting for me just beyond the doorway. The hallway stretched ahead of me, dim and unfamiliar, even though I'd walked it 1,000 times. The faint moonlight from the window in the living room spilled onto the carpet, painting strange shapes in the shadows. My feet felt heavy, like they knew something I didn't, urging me to stop. But I kept going. As I neared the living room, my senses sharpened, the faint creak of a chair shifting, a soft rustle, like someone adjusting their weight. My father's voice had gone quiet, but the air carried the impression of it, as though the sound had lingered longer than it should. I reached the doorway and stopped, my pulse hammering in my ears. The living room lay in darkness, the faint outlines of the furniture barely visible. My father's favorite chair, the one he always sat in when he visited, was directly in front of me, facing away. "Dad," my voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. The silence that followed felt alive, a weight pressing down on me. And then, faint but unmistakable, came the smell of tobacco smoke. My father had smoked for years, even though it was what eventually killed him. I hadn't smelled it since his funeral. I stepped inside, my bare feet brushing against the cold hardwood. The room felt colder than the rest of the house, like the walls themselves had absorbed the chill of something unseen. The chair didn't move, but I couldn't take my eyes off it. Then the voice came again, soft and low, as if it were right behind me. "You didn't forget, did you?" I spun around so fast I nearly lost my balance, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. The hallway behind me was empty, nothing but shadows shifting faintly as the moonlight flickered through the blinds. When I turned back, the chair had moved, just slightly. The faint screech of wood against wood had gone unnoticed in my panic, but now it sat at a slight angle as though someone had just risen. From it. Dad, I whispered again, my voice trembling. No answer. Instead, the darkness seemed to thicken around the chair, the shadows gathering in ways that didn't make sense. And then I heard it, his voice this time coming from the corner of the room where the light didn't reach. You didn't keep your promise. The word sent a jolt through me, a mix of fear and shame. My mind raced back to his last days in the hospital, the way he had grabbed my hand and maybe promised something. But what? My memory felt like it had been dipped in fog, the details just out of reach. What promise? I asked, stepping closer to the chair, though every instinct screamed at me to stay away. The voice didn't answer, but the smell of tobacco grew stronger, almost choking. The chair shifted. Again, this time spinning slightly toward me, its legs dragging loudly against the floor. My breath hitched, and I stopped moving. The weight of his presence was overwhelming now, as if the air itself had thickened around me. I knew I wasn't alone. I couldn't see him, but I could feel him, my father or whatever version of him this was. And then, just as I thought the silence would crush me, his voice came again, louder this time, echoing through the room. Fix it, Mark. Fix what you broke. The words hit me like a punch to the chest. My legs nearly gave out, but I stayed rooted in place. My mind reeling. Fix what? What had I broken? Dad, I don't know what you mean, I shouted, the sound of my voice breaking the oppressive stillness. For a moment, everything went silent. The smell of tobacco, the heavy air, even the shadows seemed to recede slightly, as though they were waiting. And then, from the chair, a faint indent appeared on the cushion, as if someone had just sat down. I stumbled backward, unable to tear my eyes away. Whatever this was, it wasn't done with me. Not yet. My feet felt like lead as I backed away from the chair, my breath ragged and uneven. The room was still too still, but the shadows clung to the edges of the walls like living things. My father's voice hung in the air, heavy with something I couldn't name. Anger, maybe, or sorrow. You can't ignore this, Mark, it said again, softer this time. You know what you did. I shook my head violently. I don't know. My words caught in my throat as a sudden flash of memory struck me. The hospital room, the beeping of monitors, my father's thin, pale hand gripping mine, his voice, weak but insistent. Promise me, Mark. Promise me you'll take care of it. I didn't even know what I'd promised at the time. I just nodded, desperate to calm him, desperate to ease the fear in his eyes. I remembered thinking he wouldn't last the night, that the promise didn't matter because nothing could be fixed. But it had mattered. To him, it had mattered. The realization hit me like a blow, and I staggered. The weight of guilt bore down on me, and for a moment, I thought I might collapse. Dad, I whispered, barely able to get the words out. I'm sorry. I didn't know what you meant. I didn't know what to do. The chair creaked, shifting slightly as if in response. The faint smell of tobacco smoke thickened, and a low guttural sound rose from the corner of the room. It wasn't quite a growl, but it wasn't human either. You left it, the voice hissed. You left everything behind. A wave of images surged into my mind. Boxes in a dusty attic, old papers scattered across a floor, a stack of unopened letters. I hadn't just failed to keep my father's promise. I'd ignored it completely. I'd left his belongings untouched after his death, never bothering to sort through them, never bothering to figure out what he'd wanted me to do. I'll fix it, I choked out, tears streaming down my face. I'll fix it, I swear. Just tell me what to do. For a moment, the room went eerily silent. Shadows seemed to retreat slightly, and I hoped it might be over. But then the voice came again, colder this time. "You'll fix it, or I'll make sure you never forget." The air in the room grew impossibly cold, and I could see my breath puffing out in thin white. Clouds. The shadows along the walls thickened, twisting and moving like they were alive. My father's voice grew louder, reverberating around the room. "You think you can make up for years of neglect in a single night?" It spat. "You can't run from this, Mark. You never could." "I'm not running," I shouted back, my voice shaking. "I just didn't know. I didn't know how to face it." The words were barely out of my mouth when the shadows surged forward, enveloping the chair. The faint indent in the cushion deepened, and for the first time, I saw him. Not clearly, just a silhouette, but it was enough. My father, or whatever was left of him, sat hunched in the chair, his face obscured by darkness. His outline flickered like a faulty video, and his voice echoed, layered with static and something unearthly. "You're still lying to yourself. You always have been." I stumbled back, my mind racing. "What do you want from me?" I yelled. "I'll fix it, I promise." "But I don't know where to start." "Start with the truth," he said, the words sharp and biting. "The truth you've been hiding even from yourself." Another wave of memories hit me, clearer this time. My father asking for help managing his debts, begging me to take responsibility for the house when he was gone. I'd promised him it would, but when the time came, I'd let it all slip through the cracks. Bills piled up. The house fell into disrepair. I'd moved on, convincing myself it was too much to handle, that it wasn't my problem. "I thought I had time," I shouted, the guilt clawing at my chest. "I thought I could deal with it later, but then you were gone, and You abandoned me," the voice cut in, each word like a blade. "You abandoned everything." The shadows surged again, this time forming into tendrils that reached for me, brushing against my skin with icy precision. I felt the weight of my father's anger, his disappointment, his pain, and it crushed me. "I'm sorry," I whispered, dropping to my knees. "I'm so sorry. I'll do it. I'll fix everything. I swear. I'll make it right." The tendrils paused, hovering just inches from my face. The silhouette in the chair flickered, and for a moment I thought it might dissolve completely. But then my father's voice came again, softer. This time, fix it, Mark. Fix it before it's too late, for both of us." And then the shadows collapsed inward, pulling everything in the chair like a vacuum. The smell of tobacco smoke disappeared, the air warmed, and the room returned to its usual stillness. But the weight of his presence didn't leave. I knew he was still watching, still waiting, and I knew this wasn't over, not until I made good on my promise. The silence that followed was deafening. I stayed kneeling on the floor, staring at the chair, half expecting the shadows to return, for my father's voice to cut through the air once more. But nothing happened. The room's just still. My heart pounded as I tried to process what had just happened. The memories, the shadows, the voice. It couldn't have been real. It shouldn't have been real. And yet, deep down, I knew it was. My father had been here, or at least some part of him had, and he wasn't going to leave until it fixed what I'd ignored for years. I stood slowly, my legs trembling, and turned on every light in the house. It was a small comfort, but it made the suffocating darkness seem a little less alive. I forced myself to sit in the living room, staring at the chair that had held my father's ghost, or whatever that was. The faint indent in the cushion had smoothed out, but I couldn't unsee it, couldn't unfeel his presence. What had he said? Fix it before it's too late, for both of us. I swallowed hard, my chest tightening with guilt. There was no running from this anymore. My father's belongings had been sitting untouched in the attic for 5 years, collecting dust while I buried myself in excuses. I told myself I'd deal with it eventually, that I was too busy, too overwhelmed. But now there was no denying the truth. My neglect had festered into something that couldn't be ignored. With shaking hands, I grabbed a flashlight and headed for the attic. The creak of the pull-down ladder echoed through the quiet house, and the air grew colder as I climbed into the space. The flashlight beam cut through the dark, illuminating boxes and forgotten furniture. And there it was, a stack of old papers on a small desk. My father's handwriting stared back at me, scrawled in bold, angry letters across a piece of paper. Don't forget. My chest tightened as I flipped through the papers, unpaid bills, deeds, notes to himself, and at the bottom, a letter addressed to me. The envelope was faded, the ink smudged, but my name was clear. I sank to the floor, the letter trembling in my hands. Whatever was inside, I knew it was the key to fixing what I had broken, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to face it. Promises to the dead are never forgotten. Have you ever felt the weight of unfinished business with someone you lost? Comment below with your thoughts.